Hello and welcome to the special fireside chat on the occasion of National Cancer Survivor Day. Today, we gather here at SPAG Friend Dialogue, a content platform dedicated to building strong and relevant conversations and amplifying the voices of various stakeholders in healthcare and technology to help our audience stay informed and engaged. The topic of today's conversation is Language Matters, Empathy in Cancer Conversations. We all know that cancer affects millions of lives around the world, and it not only poses physical challenges, but also presents emotional and psychological hurdles for patients, caregivers, and their loved ones. In this context, the power of language and the ability to communicate with empathy becomes even more crucial. And that's exactly what today's fireside chat aims to explore: the role of language in cancer conversation and highlighting the significance of empathy in this context. With that, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers for today. Harmala Gupta, who herself is a cancer survivor, a social activist, founder of Can Support, and founder president of Cancer Care India. Along with that, we have Malti Sachdev, the senior managing director at Varian, a Siemens Healthineers Company, an organization that is working towards creating a world without fear of cancer. Their expertise in the fields of cancer survivorship, social activism, and medical technology will provide us with valuable perspective on the importance of empathy and effective communication in cancer conversations. I would like to extend a warm welcome to both of our esteemed speakers here. Hi, Malti. Hello, Harmala.
Hello.
Hello.
Jumping to the first point that we have, empathy and active listening. So, Harmala, if you could, share your perspective on why empathy is so much vital and important in cancer conversations, and what are the patient's expectations when it comes to this?
I think empathy, especially when it concerns a cancer diagnosis, is absolutely crucial because we have so many thoughts in our mind connected to the word cancer. And unfortunately, most of them are negative and associated with death and dying. And so when a person hears a diagnosis, it's almost like they go into shock. And therefore, the person who is communicating with them has to communicate in a way that they can break through this. And I think the most effective way of doing this is allowing that person the time to process what has been said to them, letting them know that you're in no hurry, that you're there for them, and allowing them to cry if they have to, or express anger or whatever without judging them. And I think that is something that people perceive as helpful. And I believe it's empathetic. Empathy really means putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and experiencing what it must be like. So I think this is so crucial because a person with cancer is able, I feel, to accept finally the diagnosis simply because of the way it was told to them and the way they were informed with a sense of empathy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important how, it's being communicated, like you said, to the patient themselves. And coming from that, coming to Malti, like, since we have the patient's perspective or a person who's been a survivor of cancer, at Varian also, when we talk about uh, a world without fear of cancer, so how important, it becomes from a brand's perspective to prioritize that patient experience and ensure that empathetic communication when it comes to that.
Right. So, like Mrs. Harmala Gupta mentioned, the word cancer still continues to evoke very dark visions in the minds of people. And unfortunately, the cancer incidence globally is on the rise. However, the encouraging news is that with improvement in diagnosis, we are able to detect much earlier, which makes the overall prognosis much better. Secondly, there is a lot of technological advancement, which today allows for more precision as well as safety in the overall treatment. Siemens Healthineers and Varian together provide a comprehensive portfolio which address the entire cancer care continuum from screening to diagnosis to treatment and even to post-survivorship follow-up, with patient at the heart of everything we do. And we strongly believe that empathy in patient conversations is extremely critical, as we want to move the needle in terms of better management of cancer in the country.
Yeah, I think that's very crucial when it comes to that. And from that, moving on to my other point, when we talk about the different stakeholders that are involved when it comes to cancer care and the people around, the cancer patient, I've heard Harmala even talking about how when somebody hears the word cancer, they just, come to the conclusion that, that person is going to die. And so it becomes really crucial from, the people around, the stakeholders who are involved. So Armala, I would want to understand from you, like how important is it from the, the role of those stakeholders when it comes to the communication around cancer and when they're taking care of the patient?
Well, in our context, very often the patient is excluded, and you're really talking to the family or the principal caregiver, and you see them as the main stakeholder. And I think that's a mistake. I think there must be an attempt to include the patient in the conversation, because the patient is really the primary caregiver. I mean, the primary person involved in communication. The other thing is, I think we make an assumption that just by giving information to people, we've communicated with them. Communication is a two-way street. What you say may not necessarily have been understood by the other person. So it's very important for you to ensure that, to either use another question or reflection in some way to see that that has happened. And many of us, whether we are the caregivers or the patients, have very little knowledge and correct knowledge about cancer. And the other thing I would like to say is that the doctor has a busy clinic. He can't necessarily answer all the questions. So it's very important for him to have someone on the team, whether it's a nurse or someone else, who can then speak to the patient and the family after the doctor has had the principal conversation and reinforce what's being said, or try and understand what their concerns are and address that concern. So the stakeholder is not just the doctor, it's his team, which can include a psychologist, which can include a social worker, which can include a nurse. And so I think this is very important. But it's important for us also to make sure that we focus on the principal caregiver as well, because so much about this is maintaining a positive attitude for the patient, and the people around him or her needs to be positive, and therefore it's important for us not to neglect the family either.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you raised, because when dealing with cancer patients, like I had the opportunity of doing a few interviews with various cancer survivors. Uh, Whenever we spoke to everybody, we realized that they were, you know, harping on the fact that it's very important that the caregiver and the family of the patient is involved in the process from the stakeholders' point of view as much as the patients, because they are also in a way, not physically though, but they are also in that stage of suffering and they are also a part of that entire journey. So I think a very important point is also how you counsel them and, talk to them of how they need to talk to the patient. So I think that's also a very important point. And Malti, from a brand's perspective, if we talk about the brand, how can, they can enhance this conversations when it comes to, supporting the patient and caregivers and the family?
I think keeping the brand aside for a minute, I totally agree with Mrs. Harmala Gupta when she mentions that it's extremely important to keep patient in the loop. In India, typically we believe in telling everything to the family, and we kind of want the patient not to be aware of their actual situation, which is not the right thing to do. Patient needs to play a very important role in their overall decision making in terms of what needs to happen next. And most of the doctors run an extremely busy clinic, and I think there's a definite role of a treatment counselor in oncology, especially. And the job of a counselor is to help a patient really understand what will the treatment entail, whether it's surgery, it's radiotherapy, or for that matter, any treatment that they're going to subsequently get. And it's important that they get all this information from the right source rather than relying on informal source of, communication, which could be available. Additionally, I think enabling a conversation with a survivor can also help bring in a lot of positivity. And therefore, a survivor network should become a very important part of the ecosystem, is what I believe.
Absolutely. You raised a very important point. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think we just segued into exactly where I was coming to for my next point is how important the patient support group becomes, because there are, like how Harmala Gupta does it, when you yourself have been a part of this, even emotionally, psychologically, you are aware, the patient is what are they going to go through, what is going on inside their head. And that is where when Malti pointed out that counseling becomes important from a doctor's perspective and from a medical perspective, brings me to the next point on, how when we talk about terminology when it comes around cancer, and it becomes sometimes the terms sound so complex to the patients themselves, like using big words sometimes, may scare people. So just coming to the point of how can we, simplify the complex terminology that goes around the treatment and cancer generally as a disease?
I think that you've raised a very important point, because often palliative care is seen as a very negative term, or people just don't understand what it means. Focus on the person and say, listen, we're interested in giving you the best quality of life here while you're on treatment, even after your treatment stops. So tell us what is most important for you right now. What is troubling you the most? And, people have issues that go far beyond the medical side. We often forget that. There may be social issues, emotional issues, financial issues. There can be so many other issues and spiritual issues that need attention. So I think that we need to use simple language. Why call it palliative care? Why not say, you now maybe have pain, you have something, let's attend to that symptom, and make sure that you're comfortable. So I think these are things that people can relate to, they can understand easily. So in that sense, I think we should always keep in mind also the kind of patient we are talking to, what would be easy for them to understand in terms of where they come from. Well, I remember talking to a farmer once, and he told me, he said, I can understand what's happening because, look, I plant my wheat crop and I don't always get it all. Part of it dies. He had just been told that his son had a terminal diagnosis. So he saw it in terms of his world, how in nature he sees life and death all the time. And that's how he related to it. So again, we have to listen to people. What you started out with, I think, so important, that active listening, understand what is important to them, where they come from, and accordingly tailor our communication with them.
Exactly. Like when I was talking to one of the survivors, she was like, and she was very candid about it when she said कि कैंसर क्या है, मतलब कोई बात नहीं ना, कैंसर है, बीमारी है, ठीक हो जाएगी, मतलब. And it came from a trust which she had with her doctors and the medical team that was supporting. Because when she underwent her radiotherapy, she was like, I used to go there, and the day one when I got there, I was looking at that machine and just that room where radiotherapy happens. People get taken aback when it comes to, being in that space. But she was like, I went to the machine and I told her, Ki, look, we're going to be spending time with each other so much for like 30, 40 days. I'm going to see you every day. Let's become friends. I'm not going to be scared of you, so you better be good to me.
You're right. You see, even the radiotherapy technician is a stakeholder. The way he handles you, the way he talks to you can make all the difference.
Exactly. That is where I was coming to my next point. So, Malti, with the advancement in technology that's happening around cancer care and treatments, how important does it become to, have that effective communication with the advancement of technology so that the patients and people who are taking care become aware that, okay, it's not just heavy words and, big machines. So how is that communication important? How much is that important when you talk about that?
So, today we have tools and software available which also enable effective post-treatment follow-up even without patients having to visit the hospital. These tools can enable the hospital to be in touch with the patients on a regular basis. And if there is any urgent medical intervention required, it can be recognized much earlier. Not only that, you can also track, regularly patients' quality of life and really ensure that they're doing well after the treatment. All of this was not available before. But today, the post-treatment follow-up, survivorship, all of these are very important aspects. And I think we will see a lot more of this building up as we go by.
Yeah, I think that's very important because when it comes to patient and caregivers, they are anyways in that state where they trust the medical team the most when it comes to technology, and they leave it up to them. They don't really look at it from what product am I getting or what exact thing am I getting. They just want to be made sure that whatever I'm getting is, I can trust that thing. So coming to the next point is how important do we think is, keeping an inclusivity in cancer conversation. So when talking about not just the patient or the caregivers, generally in society, people who are not even suffering from cancer, or, there are people around who don't have any clue about what's happening in their life. So how important is that their inclusivity when it comes to, talking about cancer and talking about how we communicate about this disease in general?
I think society and the community at large is very important, because often people feel that they have been isolated, that they are not looked at in the same way. In fact, I have a little problem even with labeling someone like me as a cancer survivor. I mean, people are not labeled as diabetic survivors. They are not labeled as heart attack survivors. Why cancer survivors? So that in a way carries a stigma too, and it goes into society. People have told me that if they're truthful and they talk about the fact that they had cancer maybe as a child and now they're an adult, they may not get the job they want. It's difficult for them to get married in the traditional manner, if they're honest, and people don't want to have to start a relationship on a lie. So these are very real problems that we are facing. And what I say is, what is the point of making all those advances in cancer and claiming that we have more and more survivors if society is not willing to accept them as they were before and welcome them and integrate them? So the education of society is very important. And in an ironic way, it's happening because more and more people are getting diagnosed with cancer. So it's coming to your home. It's no longer something remote that someone else had. And so you have to contend with it. And now you realize that someone with cancer needs all the love, understanding, and empathy that you are able to give them. So I think that's very important because we don't live in isolation. We live in a society, and it should be a society that welcomes us and accepts us as citizens.
Yeah, exactly. Like how I heard you saying some time back that when you were talking to a doctor and he asked you, have you ever met a cancer survivor? And when you yourself were looking, you were like, is there no cancer in India? Why can't I find anything?
You see, in those days, now we're talking 30 odd years ago, everyone hid the diagnosis. It was not out there, There's still an attempt to hide it, but now you can no longer hide it. It's becoming more and more difficult. And people are also realizing the value of talking about it, reaching out for help, etc. More services are available. And that is the route forward, because otherwise people are not going to come for checkups, and we know that cancer must be caught early in order to be really, we start talking of cure, because they feel, my God, what if I have it? My life will come to an end. And that shouldn't be the reaction.
So just taking a pause here and, taking Malti's perspective on this and, merging the point of how conversations around cancer have evolved from some years back and now, and how, the healthcare industry generally plays an important role. So how do you think they can contribute into these conversations, like change in conversation around cancer?
I think from an overall inclusion standpoint, one of the key things is whatever advances are available in the Western world should also be available in India. I mean, it should not be so technology or treatment is available in the US and the Europe, but not available in India. So I think inclusion first and foremost means that whatever is available anywhere in the world should also be available in our country. That to me would be a big way of, changing the way we manage the disease. And secondly, I think we have a long way to go in terms of making the treatment holistically available beyond metros and tier 1 today. There is lack of treatment if you go to tier 2 and tier 3 cities to a very, very basic level, which means the patients have to travel long distances to avail of treatment, and, which impacts their life and their profession and everything. So I think creating this treatment access beyond tier 1 cities will require strong collaboration and partnership between the government and the industry, and which is where is the first step we need to take. And then, of course, come all the other aspects, social aspects that we need to manage. But I totally agree with Mrs. Harmala Gupta when she says that why should there be a stigma attached to a patient who has survived and actually fought through this battle of cancer? They should be looked at like heroes and not like someone, who has some stigma attached to them. To me, they are definitely heroes of our lives.
Thank you.
So just bringing this conversation to a closure, I would want to ask you, when it comes from conversation perspective, how do you think the future should be, or what do you think the future holds for us?
I think aligned to our vision, we need to collaboratively strive towards a world without fear of cancer. We're not saying cancer will not happen. It will definitely happen. But what it requires is a concerted effort between all the stakeholders, around awareness, around early detection, treatment, and then, of course, balancing it with empathetic conversations. That is when we would have made a real difference. So you have to look at the whole ecosystem together. There is awareness, you build in more awareness in the society, it impacts, in the long run, how survivors are looked at. You are able to treat more patients, we are able to demonstrate better survivorship data. And throughout this, empathetic conversations have to be woven in extremely strongly. I think only then we would have ended up making a real difference to the society.
Definitely, definitely. And Harmala, what would your take be on this of, what does the future hold?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what has been said just now. And I would say that it's very important for us to really talk about a continuum of care. What worries me today is the fact that you finish your treatment. Okay, if you're cured, fine. But for me, for example, 30 odd years after cancer treatment, I have issues today. And I should be able to go somewhere. Someone who knows exactly what I've been through and is able to look after me and advise me. That's not available so far. For someone who now needs palliative care, it's a difficult thing to suddenly have to pick up the phone and say, now, my cancer's come back and I need palliative care. It shouldn't have to be that way. We have to work together seamlessly with the oncology team, having the palliative team on board, the supportive care team on board, and then gradually, working our way through this continuum. And I think if we are able to do that and make treatments accessible, affordable, and bring them closer and closer to home, because I really think home care is the way forward. And I would very much like to see this model integrated into our public health system, so that we are able to cover people in rural areas and remote areas, which we're not able to do at the moment.
I agree with both of you when you were talking about how the approach should be positive in a manner and, not hold back when we talk about such things and having conversations around this. And I think that just brings us to a very beautiful conclusion to this chat that we had. So thanking you both, Harmala Gupta and Malti Sachdev, for sharing your valuable insights on this topic. Your experiences and your insights have, provided us with a very deeper understanding on how language is important and can shape the patient experience and foster empathetic communication when it comes to cancer. The power of language and empathy can make a remarkable difference in the life of those touched by cancer. So I hope we can continue the conversations beyond this fireside chat and work together to create a world where compassion, understanding, and support are at the forefront of every cancer journey. And for our audience, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to SPAG Fin Dialogue You can also visit our website www.spagdialogue.com to stay up to date on our latest content and join the conversation on health and technology. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to bringing you such more engaging conversations and discussions in the future.